friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Hey Rewind friends, welcome back. This is Andrew Nunn, your podcast host. With me, we've got a returning member to the crew here. Early days, this whole thing was started by Pastor Keith Sparrow, and now you're back.
It's been a while, but
it's been a while.
Glad to be back.
We're glad to have you. So, Keith, you were teaching on our Kitchener stream, and then Pastor or Captain Kirk teaching here on our Cambridge.
You should tell my kids that. I wish they don't talk to me like that.
Pastor or Captain?
Yeah.
You don't get either at
I
home?
don't get either.
I'll see what I can do. Josh
all
is
right.
one of our youth leaders, so I'll see if I can drum that up for you.
I appreciate that.
I know that you love it. So, friends, we're here after the Tuesday after our Valentine's Day / Family Day weekend / your daughter's birthday weekend.
Yes,
Kirk. So
whole
there's
weekend.
a lot of things going on. So, wanted start with you, Keith. What were you guys up to as a family this weekend?
Oh man, we spent time together as a family, which is such a rarity these days.
First time in a long time.
No, we hung out. We watched some movies. We did some special meals.
Mm-hmm.
We did Valentine's. I kind of put on a suit and served my kids. They weren't expecting that.
I saw some
Nice.
pictures. See?
Yeah.
Is creme brulee involved?
There was creme brulee.
Blowtorch and stuff?
I had to find a blowtorch thanks to our neighbors who lent that to us. But yeah, that was fun. So just honored our kids that way and loved them. And my daughter probably giggled for 5 minutes solid before she even sat at the table once she saw me. So we got the reaction we wanted. So.
Perfect. There's nothing quite like embarrassing a teenager, right?
Oh, it's the best.
And Captain Kirk, what were you up to this weekend?
Yeah, it was our daughter Sydney's birthday this weekend, so she wanted the whole weekend to be her birthday weekend, so that's what we did. Saturday night, Sunday, Monday, cake's still left over, so Tuesday, Wednesday, it's still long going.
So with that much cake, it was really a celebration for everybody.
It was a celebration for everybody. Absolutely. It's the gift that keeps giving.
Wonderful. And I'm always down for baked goods, so when we're allowed to, I might just have to come try some pie. I'm excited about that. So on the heels of Family Day weekend, that's what we were talking about this past Sunday. And man, you know, as a series design team, as just like people in ministry, we're starting to recognize the extended lockdown season that we're in, man, like the pressure point that's putting on our families. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was really wise, not just to hit that because it was Family Day weekend, but I think the timing, I know in my family, like we're starting to feel it at a level. I don't know if it was just like the anticipation of like, we better get out of lockdown here or what, but it just feels like the tension is building and emotions are running higher and all that sort of stuff. So did you guys feel, we'll start with you, Kirk, was there any pressure to this message for you that you felt like, hey man, because of this moment, I better get this right?
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't say there's more pressure than normal, but I would just say that there is a reality that you just are aware that there's so many nuances to people's stories, and to try to give wisdom that's going to be applicable across such a huge number of people, it was really difficult to try to pull together in a half-hour message.
Yeah.
Because I just kept hearing people's stories. You know, I could imagine sitting down and having a conversation with someone and they go, yeah, but you didn't really talk about this part of what I'm dealing with in my family. And that, I think, was probably the most difficult part for me.
Yeah, and Keith, was there anything for you that you found particularly pressure building or difficult here?
Much the same, other than I haven't preached in over a year, so it felt odd jumping back in the saddle, but it was good.
And it was just you and Ben in the room.
So. Yeah, so it's not like I got to preach to a normal congregation. It was to a camera.
Isn't it amazing preaching to a camera?
Oh.
It is the best.
We'll save all those for you in the future, then, Kirk, because that's not how it felt to me.
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I can't wait to regather again this Sunday. Yeah, I mean, much the same as Kirk. Like, I think as I was sitting down prepping, and you're writing different things down, and it brings you back to different conversations you've had and different meetings you've had with various families, and everyone has their unique situation, and so in all honesty, a lot of that message I preach to myself in many ways, and I think you have to do that often. So you're speaking to areas that you've got to shore up, and God has spoken into over the years as well, and that's kind of where it comes from. So,
and one of the uniquenesses of preaching through the Book of Proverbs is that it's not like if I know you had a similar message earlier on working through the Book of Ephesians, I think, right? And then you have like a pericope that you're pulling from, and there's a section of scripture that's built around this thing, where in Proverbs it's often like a line or two, and it's created differently. Did you find that added to the complexity of the message?
It did, because you want to preach out of Proverbs exclusively, but you had to pull from different parts of scripture. But I mean, any one of our points from Sunday could have been a message on their own.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest, each one of those Proverbs could be a message on their own. And, we had our kind of outline of some of the main scripture pieces we were wanting to preach from, but yeah, there's a wealth of wisdom in Proverbs.
That's why we're here.
That's it. So it forces you to really become succinct in the way that you say things and do and the way that you summarize those pieces as well. And so I mean, it just goes to show there is a lot to learn for our families, and it's an ongoing journey that we never really end, and we're always growing in. So
yeah. Kirk, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that, we've talked quite openly that wisdom is different than God's commands.
Right.
And, but you and I were talking off air, like, don't minimize wisdom, because if you just call it, well, that's somebody's opinion, you got to remember, this is actually God's opinion.
Right.
So it's not just like some Joe on the side of the street saying, hey, you should like love your wife better. It's God saying, here's how you love your wife properly.
Right. The guy who created marriage.
Yeah, the guy who created marriage is kind of giving you some wisdom. So it's different than a command, but it's kind of coming from the same source. So you got to think of it from that perspective too. Yeah,
which is, it gives the Proverbs weight, right? Like it's not just like some meme that, a homeschool mom put up on her Facebook feed. This is the word of God.
That's right.
And I thought it was interesting for you guys. We are all like middle-aged white guys who are all married. So like,
first of all, I appreciate you calling me middle-aged, because that's not what my kids
that was the
me.
pause. That was the pause. It's like, where do I put Kirk? But we come from a lot of the same demographic. And then as guys asked to speak to the design of marriage, there is another half to that, right? And you guys both went at Proverbs 31, and I was like, okay, how is this going to go down? And I appreciate it. You guys were very much in alignment in how you handled this, and you both sort of flipped it on its head, and I was like, oh, you guys, you're paying attention. So
Kirk was braver than me admitting what he did.
There was a certain pastor's wife in this church who texted my wife right after my illustration about going through the Proverbs 31 woman with Shannon before we were married.
Yeah.
There was a pastor's wife in this church who said, I can't believe you still married him. I refuse to throw that person under the bus, Amanda Fuller. And
yeah, that was right. Yes. But I thought, Keith, you rightly pointed out, in like Bible college, like early, coming to Christ, living overzealously, like there was a sense in which I used that as a shopping list. I think you used language similar to that on Sunday, that you're like, oh, if I'm going to marry a woman, I want her to be a Proverbs 31 woman. And so she better check all these boxes for me. And I've loved how you just called out the selfishness and the unbiblical nature of that.
I could only do it because it was probably a shopping list for me at one point too, but in a much softer form. But yeah, it's not that at all. I think we can take out of, as we said on Sunday, look at how Solomon just points out all the good qualities in his wife, and he honors her with those.
Yeah.
And that's what you're looking for.
Yeah,
so.
You use the language of honor. I think you use the term of valuing her, and I think both use the term praising, like verbally just encouraging and building up and strengthening our wife, that you have to recognize that this is a man speaking about a woman, not just to be like, if you're looking for a lady, this is what you want to look for. And I thought that was really helpful. Kirk, I loved your language of teammates. Being a sports guy, you can always appreciate that. And like it ties in really well with the honoring, right? Like if you're on the same team, you can watch guys who like literally punched each other in the face in the heat of battle, and then they get traded to the same team, and they're like, but that's my guy, ride or die, man. Like we are a teammate. And there's some sense in which we need to have that translate into our marriage. So I thought it'd be helpful for you to sort of build out that, how do we become better teammates as husbands and wives?
Yeah, I think that if you look at Proverbs 31 in its full context, it actually reminded me a lot of the creation story in Genesis, in the sense of you have God creating a man and a woman, and he gives to them a mandate of things that they're to do together to help fill the earth, to help create culture, to do all the things that they're supposed to do. But it was always this picture of you're in this together as a couple doing these things. And so I really felt like when I read through Proverbs 31, I was seeing the beginning talking about a king and his mom saying, here's the things that, are what a godly woman looks like. And I read through this, I'm like, yeah, there's this picture of a king who's doing his job, and he's got a woman with him, and she's not just kind of off on her own, but together they are impacting people's lives. Together they're impacting communities, and together they are building a family, and together they are making a difference. And so it really is this picture of, as a husband and wife coming together and going, what's our shared mission? What's our shared calling for our family? In terms of the kind of impact we want to make in the world, the kind of family we want to create, more importantly, the kind of impact God wants us to have in the world, and the kind of family God wants us to create. And how do we take and leverage off of each other's gifts and strengths and talents and abilities and experiences, and take those things together and say, this is the best way we are together going to go about doing that. And so I just really found a beautiful picture in Proverbs 31 of that kind of a relationship between a husband and wife, and the calling for the husband to recognize that gift of his wife in that way, that he doesn't just have to be off on his own doing his own thing, but we're in this together as a couple.
Yeah, and as I think especially as an early married guy, that battle between doing things with your spouse. I had a lot of friends who sort of were getting married but living as single men, and they're like, hey, do you want to come do these things? And I have to wrestle with I've already been out 3 times this week. If I actually want to have a marriage, I need to stay home and not go do those things. So the proper term for this is husbandry, right Keith? That's
Yes, that's cultivating.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, putting time and effort and into your marriage.
So
sure.
I actually have used the term husbandry in my marriage incredibly out of context for a number of years now. So I'm thinking it's actually being a husband, but it's really being a farmer.
That's the root term was from the word farm. Yeah. To cultivate and to get the best out of the fields. And yeah.
It's cool that you used the Genesis 1 creation story, right? Because that's really the image there, the caretaking and the cultivating, fill the earth and subdue it, take care, and then the call to caretake together, a suitable helper.
And even if you look at Ephesians 5, right, the chapter about love your wife like Christ loved the church, we stop at that verse and we don't actually read the parts after it, which tell us how to love our wife and it talks about that idea of nurturing and being that caretaker and cultivating the very best in your wife, being her biggest fan and just encouraging her along the way. It's just an amazing picture to me. And so I used to work in men's ministry, so I'm going to talk directly to guys for a second.
Yeah, I knew that was
like a guy.
We were gonna
right. So there's a lot of guys who they'll read that kind of stuff and go, well, I'm not very good at nurturing and I'm just not a nurturer. And, my answer to that is look at your truck or look at your yard. And the truth is, how to nurture what you decide you want to nurture. It's whether or not you actually are willing to invest the energy to learn how to nurture, how to cultivate properly. And that's what we're called to in our marriages. If you want to create a great home environment and a great family, God's wisdom says you're going to be a cultivator in the heart and life of your wife.
Amen.
Yeah, and you even said that in terms of the family unit too, right? You as a family are dedicated to something, whether that's academics or athletics or whatever, but to be dedicated to the right thing. I thought was a helpful call for me, right? Because even good things can be distracting.
Absolutely.
I love sports, but if that's what I'm chasing after, I love this church. I love church ministry. Like, that's one of the things I'm dedicating my life to. But if I'm chasing after church attendance instead of being dedicated to Christ and his kingdom, man, like those are distractions along the way, even
Absolutely.
good things.
Yep.
As we're chatting here, I just can't help but think, if, I'm a single 20 or 30 something, or somebody who either has been married and is no longer married for any particular reason, or somebody who's never been married, like, what would you want to say to somebody listening to a message on, Family Day weekend about God's design for the family, and they are single? I think, Keith, you did a beautiful job sort of recognizing, like, there's some people who either aren't married or long to be married, or even are in a marriage and they wish they weren't in, and sort of addressing that. But what would you want to say to somebody who's sitting there in that moment? So, Keith, I'll throw it to you first. What do you want to say to those people in that category?
Marriage and parenting is hard work. And so before anything else, make sure you are cultivating your own heart and building into your own spiritual life and well-being. I think all of these relationships and the health of these relationships kind of build off our relationship with God. And so if we first and foremost as a child of God have a healthy relationship with our Father, that is going to creep into all other relationships. And so, I mean, when you see marriages falling apart, when you see parent-child relationships falling apart, it often has a root in just your own selfishness, your own brokenness, and that's all kind of coming out in those places and bringing unhealth into those relationships. So before you even think of dating, before you even think of getting married, my daughter hopefully is listening. No, her future husband, I hope, is listening.
Amen.
Make sure that your relationship with God is strong, healthy, and well, and cultivate that relationship first and foremost.
Anything you'd add in addition to that, Captain Kirk?
I think that a couple things. One, we live in a generation where the average person is not getting married now for the first time until they're like 29, 30, 31 years old. And sometimes that's rooted in fear. Sometimes there's a place of, I've seen so much brokenness in families and marriage, like I'm just afraid that's what's going to happen to me.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that.
And I'm not going to do that. And I just want to say that it actually is possible for a family to thrive. Don't let fear be what holds you back. You may need to wait for the right person to come along. You should wait for the right person to come along.
That's probably a good idea.
But don't let fear be what holds you back from pursuing building a family in a marriage relationship. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would just add to it is if you're in a place where you are maybe hurting because you've come out of a failed relationship and things have been broken and damaged, I'll say this just from my own personal perspective. I grew up as a teenager with a single mom taking care of us. So I think that I have witnessed God work miracles in families in those kinds of situations. And I know that it might feel hopeless some days where you just wonder, how can my family ever thrive in this kind of moment, in this kind of circumstance? But I could tell you story after story of God's goodness and faithfulness to homes who've gone through a lot of brokenness and pain. And by God's grace, I am a walking, living testimony to God's goodness in a broken family. And so when I talked about, don't put a period where God's put a comma, that's my story. And for a lot of people who are living in that space right now where you're just like, I don't think my family can ever thrive because of the brokenness that we're in. Don't put a period on your family like that. God can rewrite your story. God can open a new chapter for you. And I've seen that and lived it.
That's so powerful.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I'd also want to say, working with youth and young adults, right? also, can we just like address the fact that singles do not matter less to God than
Absolutely.
people who have a family? I think there's sort of an undercurrent of a belief for people who look around the church and say like, oh, all these, ministries are designed for, marriages and families and kids, and I don't have any of those things. I thought, Keith, you did a really great job saying like, hey, then like you're part of this family, like this church family, and you matter because you are a beloved child of the Most High God, not because you have a family to contribute to our family, right? And just, I think we need to explicitly state that to those people.
Yeah, I love seeing young adults involved in family, like the church family.
Yeah.
Whether it's helping out with families that have young kids or just, if you want to get to know what a family's like, just go hang out with a young family.
Yeah.
If you want to navigate maybe some of the struggles of a young married couple, hang out with a young married couple.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to don't be afraid to jump into those places and just be a part of them and experience it. And there's a lot to be a lot of things you can grow in that.
Yeah, and I think, both of you guys sort of said on the front end, like there's just so many different dynamics when you start talking about a family. You can always have the like, yeah, but what about my situation going on in your head? And we just want to apologize. It will not cover everybody's family situation here, but we believe that God does have a good design for life and living, and that includes
Absolutely.
the family. So, Kirk, one of the things I love that you said was that there's this connection between being a good, godly husband and having a good, strong marriage before you're parenting. One of the struggles I have witnessed is I think it's particularly true for ladies, not exclusively, but there's this place where women find their value in how well they care for their children, and their marriages struggle, and guys can often do the same with work. Those are like wild blanket statements, but that's the majority of the times that that's happening. That's often the way that it breaks down. So what would you want to say pastorally if somebody finds themselves in that spot when they're saying like, my marriage is not getting my best, it's getting the leftovers, which is, I think, a term that you used. So what would you say, like, how do I practically address that in my life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that, first of all, you have to kind of the theory around it first before I get practical. You have to look at it from the perspective of God made you to be one with one person, and it's not your kids. and so your life is going to go through all kinds of changes as you go through. You're going to have, the stage where you have kids, and then there's going to be a time when your kids move out, and you're going to have careers, you're going to have jobs that change, you're going to move into different houses, you're going to have friendships that come and go. But the one relationship that's meant to be the constant through it all in terms of a human relationship is with your wife or with your husband if you're a woman. So like you have to have that kind of philosophy going into everything that you do, that we are designed to be one together.
Yeah.
And if you have that philosophy, then it shapes how you make decisions in life. I've had job decisions I've had to make before where I'll bounce it off my wife and she'll go, no. And because I value being one with my wife over that career ambition, right, then I make the decision of, I'm going to listen to my wife's advice right now because she's seeing some things about that job opportunity that I'm not seeing. So things like that, how you consider your time investment. I know when you've got young kids, it's crazy and chaos and everything else. I think doing things intentionally to help around, if you're a guy, help around the house with your wife as you're trying to deal with all the situations with the kids. But then creating space for you to just have some time together. One of the best pieces of advice I received early in our marriage was, if at all possible, try and figure out a way for every day after dinner, spend 20 minutes just checking in with each other to see how your day was. Get the kids playing a game somewhere, get them doing something so they're distracted, and just give yourselves 20 minutes by yourselves just to check in. And making your marriage that kind of priority every day was a huge investment for Shannon and I. We committed early on that we were going to twice a year go away for a weekend, just the two of us. And it was, you can look at that as an expense or you can look at it as an investment.
Ooh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to decide. We all know about investing in the things that matter to us because of the long-term dividends. And you need to choose to make the investments in your marriage. It doesn't mean that you're going to be kind of all cozy and cuddly 24/7 to prioritize your marriage, but it does mean that you're creating intentional space first for each other, and commitment to hearing each other and supporting each other and serving each other before you get into all the other messiness of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Keith, I thought you made a great point. You were talking about, if your kids speak to your wife with, disrespect, or they're, doing the things that budding teenagers sometimes do, that you say, hey, you and Beth are one. So as far as you're concerned,
Yeah.
we're also having this conversation at the same time.
Absolutely. No, our kids learned very, very early on, you aren't going to convince dad that mom's wrong. You're not going to convince mom that dad's wrong.
Yeah.
They're going to probably talk about it later, and they may come to you together with a different conclusion later. But there's a unified front. I mean, and we've always told our kids, like, we love all three of you equally. They've got their ideas of who we love more. I'm sure you guys hear that.
Yes.
But we do. We love them all equally. But there's never been any question about the fact that I love Beth more than them.
Yeah.
And we have that conversation regularly. And I think it's a healthy thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do the same thing, Kirk. We make sure to get away at least once, if not twice a year, for a weekend, 3 or 4 days without the kids. And we tell the kids we're investing in ourselves, because there's no greater gift that we can give our kids as parents than a healthy marriage.
Yep.
And that was something somebody told us to do early on in our marriage as well, and we've made it. And there were years where it was tough, and it was hard to get the finances together for it. So not all of them have been super fancy.
Right.
Yeah.
But they don't need to be super fancy. It's a time investment more than a financial investment, away where we can just focus on each other. So.
Yeah, that's something I am going to star in this podcast and steal from both of you guys, because I think that's a fantastic
And
idea.
for those of you who don't have any money right now, and you're listening to us going, yeah,
Wouldn't that be nice?
On the big salary all of you guys are making, then I can see this. And I just want to say, listen, it is about intentionality. So I have a friend who he had lost his job. Their family was essentially bankrupt financially at one point, and they had no money to do anything. They were trying to get themselves back in order financially, but they made this commitment to once a week being date night, even if they didn't leave the house. And so they had 5 young kids, and they were so committed to date night that they would actually one night a week put their kids in their bedrooms early. They said, you can play in your room, you can do whatever you want, but you're going to bed an hour earlier than you normally would, so that mom and dad can have date night together. And he told a story to me one time I'll never forget. He said, so one day we're putting all of our kids, after dinner, we say, okay, it's time to go to your rooms, it's date night. And one little boy says, you're going to spend time with her again. And the dad says, come here, son, and calls the son over. And he gets down at his son's level, looks his son in the eye and says, son, he said, she's the woman I love. You're just the fruit of our love. Go to your room.
Wow.
But it tells a message immediately to your kids,
does.
right?
Absolutely.
Like, the kids know the priority level in the family at that point.
Yeah.
And that's important for kids to thrive too.
Yeah.
It helps the kids to understand. Yeah.
Well, they're going to take that as a lesson into their future, into their marriage, into their families in the future as well.
Yeah.
So you're training up a child in the way they should go.
That's right.
I know we're not there yet, Andrew.
Yeah,
sorry,
we'll
but
get
it just
to that
came
one.
to me. I had to say it.
Awesome. And then, Keith, in talking about, the parent-child relationship, I love this line. You just said it and then ran right past it. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's a whole sermon there, Keith. You said, you discipline best when you honor first. And I was like, okay, like, I'm here
That'll
for that.
tweet.
Yeah,
You can put that on
that
there.
will tweet. If I had a Twitter account, I would put it on there. Does anyone still have Twitter other than Donald Trump? No.
Let's not go there.
Okay, all right. Before we derail the conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. Could you build that thought out? Because you ran right past it. And I was like, stop.
You discipline first when you honor. You discipline best when you honor first.
The meaning changes when you flip those around.
It does. Well, you have to have that to really discipline, which is to teach and to grow your kids, right, and cultivate your relationship with them, to teach them. You have to have a level of respect from them as well, for them to listen and to take what you're saying. And the thought that just kept going over and over in my head, I'd heard this in some of my preparation, was just the fact that our kids are growing up in a world that has so little respect for them. And doesn't show much respect.
Yeah.
I spoke about that with husbands and wives. Like, all of us are in a world that shows so little respect for anything. You talk about Twitter and what's said on there.
Yeah.
You talk about what's happening on just general social media, what's happening on our media. There is very little respect shown for the fellow human being around us.
Absolutely.
And our homes, our families need to be a safe place for our kids. And if they're walking in and they're being shown very little honor and very little respect, and they're being when they're being dishonored constantly in the world around them, it's going to be hard to really discipline them, to teach them, to grow them, if they are scared and constantly worried about being dishonored by their parents. And so if we can honor our kids and show them the worth that Christ has shown us in them, then that opens up many opportunities and possibilities for us to grow them up and to teach them and to cultivate godly values in them as well. So
I think the reason that hit me so hard is because it's something that I so deeply struggle with. I'm, a firstborn, do it right kind of person. So when my kids mess up, I'm like, that was wrong and you shouldn't have done it. And my reaction can often be out of frustration. I don't know if it's, being at home as much as I'm not used to being, but I had a really great conversation with Laura, who, if there's ever been a debate about who's the better parent, Laura runs away with that award. We were sitting there, we were sitting in the window seat in our bedroom, and she said, we're not trying to just correct our kids, we're trying to shape them. And I was like, oh, that's different, right? If, discipline and disciple are interlinked, right? If we're trying to shape our kids more and more into the image of Jesus, we have to do that in a way that honors the value in them first. And man, God was teaching me through that little runaway line that you probably didn't even remember that you said, but struck me to the core.
No, I remember writing that one, and it was one that came from a season of growth in me, because that's not always been my natural instinct. I'm a firstborn too. And so I grew up seeing the fault in my younger siblings all the time. And my wife has honored me well by pulling me aside occasionally and saying, Keith, you might want to just react a little differently to that. And certainly in our earlier years of parenting, I was very quick to point out the flaws and the mistakes that our kids made. And that doesn't make them better people. Nope. Those small little things, right? So we've really intentionally over the last number of years trying to be strong and good at pointing out and honoring the godly characteristics within our kids.
Yeah.
So I use the throwaway kind of thing, about garbage. We're quick and easy to say, hey, you forgot to take the garbage out on time this week. But on the 12 weeks prior to that, did we honor them for the fact that they participated in family life and helped the family out by diligently taking the garbage out, sorting it, getting it out to the sidewalk on time? And so making sure you do that. And then certainly in the bigger things in life, as they make stands for Christ, as they stick up for their kids, their friends that are being bullied, that kind of stuff, you want to make sure you always point those out, cheer those on, and encourage your kids in that as well.
I love that.
But it's not a natural thing for me.
No.
It's something God's been growing in me, and it's been a journey.
And you do that differently at different stages, right? Like my oldest is 11. I know your oldest is in high school now, and Captain Kirk, your youngest.
My oldest just turned 25.
Yeah, so
I'm not really middle-aged anymore, am I?
I'm glad you said it, and I didn't have to. But I thought you know, as someone who's ventured into the waters of parenting teenagers before, Keith and I have, you talked about that idea of moving to a role instead of like being able to command your kids, you're coaching your kids. You're giving them an extra level of freedom and helping them make decisions instead of making their decisions for them. And, you know, that's an analogy when I work with parents in student ministry that I've used a lot. So I'm thankful that someone much wiser than I and who's actually done the thing that I'm talking about would use that same analogy. So how has that played out in your life, that move to coach?
Yeah, well, it starts with, you have to start by seeing the long-term purpose of being a parent in the first place. And so if you're, and this comes back to the Proverbs verse about training up a child in the way he should go. If your goal, if what you're trying to be dedicated to do is to teach your kid to be the smartest person in the world, that's going to impact how you parent your kid. If your goal is to have them be the next great athlete in the world, that's going to impact how you parent your kid. If your goal is to teach them the way of wisdom and to teach them to be a godly person and follow Jesus, so that as an adult, they're living in wisdom, that's going to impact how you parent your kids. And so, you know, you have to look at these different seasons of life as an opportunity to begin to take that next step towards that ultimate goal of what you're trying to release your kids to. And so it shapes all your decisions. So for me, when they're young, you are their leader, whether you feel like it or not. You're making all the decisions for them. And as they get older, you're learning to be more that coach of where you're giving them the space to begin to make some of their own decisions, but there's still kind of these guidelines and structures that they have to live within.
Right.
You know, like for us, when they were little kids, it was like, we're going to church every Sunday. And as they became teenagers, there was still for us that guideline of we're going to church every Sunday. There were other things where we gave them space to make their own decisions on, but going to church on Sunday was not one of those places we gave them space. But then there's also this reality that when they become adults, you don't have any more authority over their life, and you do have influence.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've done the first couple of steps right, you
That's
still
right.
have some influence.
You definitely have influence, and that's why I use the word mentor at that stage of life, because as they become adults, you're engaged more as a mentor. You're asking questions, you're helping them to think through situations, and helping them to come to wise decisions for themselves. And you know, you have to be willing at the mentor stage to actually let go of your authority, to be able to say, I'm giving my input, but really this is your choice to make. And you know, that includes if most kids are waiting till if most young adults are waiting until they're
not middle-aged.
in their late 20s to get married. That also means even in some of their dating relationships, right? As they get into their 20s, if they're 25 years old and they haven't made a decision on who they're going to be married to yet, who am I dating, who am I not dating, you don't have any more authority over who they're dating or not dating. You have input,
Right.
you have wisdom to share, but you have to be okay with letting them make their decisions.
Yeah, and it sounds like sort of as you move along in the parenting journey, you know, while the early days are hard, you're pulling your hair out, you feel like you never have a second to breathe. It doesn't get
it's harder.
easier.
It's actually harder because there are times where you see your kids running to the edge of a cliff and you know what's on the other side of that cliff. And everything in you wants to be like, treat them like they were when they were 3 years old. And you want to protect them and pull them back and stop them from running over the edge of the cliff. But they're at a stage of life where sometimes they need to run over the edge of the cliff. And, you know, as a parent, your role at that point is to be like God the Father is to us when we run over the edge of the cliff. And God's not sitting there saying, I told you so, right? He's sitting there going with grace and mercy. He's picking us back up, putting us back on our feet. And that's our role as parents in those seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like you were referring to the whole idea of the whole Book of Proverbs, right? Like, here's the gift of wise teaching. Use it as you see fit, right? But to remember where particularly these verses are coming from. Yeah, and you know, it doesn't get easier. I'm excited for that. Thank you, Kurt.
Just wait till your daughter starts dating. That's all I'm going to say.
She's 6, man. Chill.
I'm thankful.
Keith's next.
I'm a little thankful for COVID in some regard right now. We're stuck at home.
But Keith, I thought you made a really great point that, the three of us are all parents, but we're also children. Like we have parents that we are also called to interact with in a way that we honor. And those two things have an interplay that I think sometimes we neglect. So I'd love for you to remind us of that, Keith, that interaction of us also being children.
Yeah. Well, as I started reading, honor your mother, honor your husband, honor your wife, honor your kids. There's the natural flip to honor your parents. And I initially started thinking about what instruction am I going to give to the 5 to 15-year-olds in the room. But really, I wanted to speak to peers and those of us that have older parents. And I am blessed with, I mentioned this in my message, I'm blessed with Beth, who has worked in long-term care for years and currently works at a retirement home. And so you often hear of stories, and she has many stories of families that have loved their parents beautifully and take care of them all the way through. But you occasionally hear of families where that isn't the case, and just the heartache that brings and the brokenness that brings into a family, and then trickles down generation to generation to generation, right? So, for us, again, it's one of those things. If we want our kids to respect and honor us, we have to first and foremost demonstrate that respect and honor towards our parents. And this is definitely one of those where, as I was sitting writing this part, I had so many stories going through my head of people that had had grown up in broken families with really difficult experiences. And so how do you honor your parents when you never felt honored yourself? And so the whole concept of, you need to forgive. Now, that's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
For some, that's going to be probably a lifelong journey, but it really is a gift that you can give yourself in forgiving your parents, because once you are able to let go of that hurt and that anger, you're able to start the journey towards bringing health into those relationships, not just the relationships purely with your parents, but then that brings health into your relationships with your kids and your siblings and all those around you. And so, if you heard that on Sunday morning and said, but Keith, you haven't heard my story. I haven't heard your story, but I empathize with you, and say, take the time, pray about it. And that's where the family of God comes in. Yeah. Because you have a family around you that wants to support you and encourage you in that as well, and journey with you towards that place of forgiveness. So
what I'm hearing here is that family, while good, is hard work. To prioritize marriage in the midst of growing families is difficult. Having heartache of not being able to start a family or get married can be difficult. Honoring your parents when they haven't honored you well can be difficult. What sort of foundation should we build our lives on so that this difficult work can happen? Kirk, have you any insight?
Is the right answer Jesus?
It sure is.
I think we joke about it, but it's so true. Like it just, the best place in my life where I have learned to become more like Christ has been family. Because it's just so much, there's so much time and emotional energy that goes into family. And it's every flaw is exposed, everything is just front and center, and it is the best environment where I have learned to become more like Christ. Not the only environment, but the best environment. And I can't imagine trying to build a family, knowing all the weaknesses and all the flaws and failures and all the need for forgiveness and grace and all those things. I cannot imagine trying to do all of that on a foundation other than Jesus. Because he's actually the one that gives me the ability to be honest about my own sinfulness and the ability to extend grace to my family in their weaknesses and failures. And I can't even possibly imagine doing it without Jesus.
Now, I don't disagree with you in any regard, not only because you're my boss, but also because you're right. But if I'm really honest, I find it incredibly difficult. It's true, right? When Laura and I do marriage prep and all that sort of stuff, we say like there is no hiding in these relationships.
Yep.
It exposes you in a way that is biblical and will cause you to have to examine yourself. And I often find, particularly in the area of parenting, and like doing that in a way that honors God, I find really difficult. I wish I was the guy who, religiously every day at the dinner table had the Bible open, but with 4 young kids, sometimes I ask myself, is it even worth trying tonight? So what does that practically look like? Anchoring your family in Jesus, which is absolutely the right answer, Kirk, to answer your earlier question.
So I would say I don't want to give anybody a prescriptive way of doing it because I think it's going to be different for each family. There's just different strengths, gifts, culture of your family. I think the overall tone of your family just needs to be, we want to follow Jesus. If you create an overall tone of, we want to follow Jesus, then sort it out. Really, that's the bottom line. Sort it out together as a husband and wife and as kids. Say, well, what does that look like, mean in our family? What does it mean for us to grow in understanding who Jesus is, to talk to him, to serve him, to let him control, be Lord over our family? Figure that out. I think there's a real danger in trying to be too prescriptive on that. We didn't do devotions every single day. Matter of fact, I've gone through large stretches of time where we didn't do any family devotions because I felt like I was a complete failure at doing family devotions.
Yeah.
Because I just watched my kids roll their eyes and run away from the table as fast as possible because they didn't want to be there. Right. And so but the culture of our home was always, we want to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's what stuck with our kids and with our family.
Awesome. Keith, is there anything for you that you would add to that in terms of like building that foundation on Jesus? Anything? I think we do need to cut a wide berth for people here, but
yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting as Kirk was talking just about how the family it's a great place to grow, and it's a really difficult place. I often think, we use that word sanctification, which is growing in our faith. And if you had to go each one of my kids and ask them of their parenting stories, you'd get a pretty good picture of my sanctification as a father. And because they've each had a very different experience at different stages in life, right, as I've just grown. But I mean, much the same as Kirk, we've gone through seasons where we've been really good at devotions and others without. But our kids have never questioned what was first and foremost in our home. And so, as pastors, it's interesting because you involve your kids in ministry, and they were the ones that were there. When we did a church plant, they were the ones running ProPresenter and slides and sound and setting up the kids areas and doing everything. And so we also had to be really careful that their spiritual formation wasn't just formed around church, but became a relationship with Christ. And so as each of them has made decisions to be baptized, they probably got grilled more than any other kid to make sure this is your decision. It's not just because you feel dad would want you to get baptized. And same when they made decisions to follow Jesus, man, did we grill them all just to make sure. But I mean, those are incredibly exciting days, and so we honored those things in their life and try to. I loved your word culture. What is the culture of your home?
Yeah, I love that.
The culture of our home is to follow Jesus as best we can, and sometimes that is through family devotion style teaching. It's through forgiving one another. It's looking through. It's carrying everything through the lens of Christ. And so when there's a moment for forgiveness, when there's a moment for repentance, it's done through the lens of, we do this because Christ did it for us first. And sometimes you can, as a parent, feel, especially when they're younger, you can feel like, oh, this is super cheesy, but it's building that culture within them and letting them understand that. So
I love that. And for me, as a guy with a young family, there's some relief in knowing that godly men I respect didn't get it right all the time too. So like, there is hope for me.
Trust me.
So I'm really thankful for that. As we wrap up, is there any resources or things along the way that you'd like to put in the hands of our people as they...
There's over 60,000 of them on Amazon. So
Love that.
most of them are not good. But it's, yeah, you know, it's too hard for me to pinpoint any one particular resource. There's a lot of great stuff out there for families, and just do some good searching for Christian family resources. You'll run across some stuff.
And a couple of the books that have really been helpful for me, Laura, who loves me a lot, gave me the Dad Tired book.
Good book.
Jared loves it.
Yeah.
It's great. It was a helpful gospel-centered reminder that, like, well, you suck, Andrew. You're not as bad as you could have been, which is really helpful for me. And then also 2/3 of the way through Family Discipleship by Matt Chandler, which is a really good one as well. It gives some, you know, I love how you created that flexibility and not being prescriptive, guys, but also saying like, this is the center point of how we do this. That also gives some really helpful things on that. So thank you guys so much for your ministry on Sunday and for here. Kirk, you're going to be back next week.
In Kitchener. Live and in person.
Nice.
Can't wait. That's going to be fun.
That is exciting times. And we'll be back talking about how to make godly and wise decisions, right? And I think we could all use a little bit more of that.
Just a bit.
Absolutely. So as you make decisions this week, be prepared to become a sermon illustration for yourself. We love you, Rewind friends, and we will see you next week.